Welcome to Friday. We have renewed urgency from the White House about the situation between Russia and Ukraine and a call for all Americans to leave Ukraine. Because of these developments, because of a change of tone and a change of information, I wanted to jump on real quick before the weekend, give you a couple bullet points of what we learned and why it matters, but also just provide some perspective about where we are in this particular story. We also have news on a separate topic completely, but big one for families in America about the COVID-19 vaccine for the littles among us, those 6 months to just under 5 years old. So we're going to get to that as well, but let's focus on the foreign policy story because this is igniting headlines around the world. This recent White House press briefing where the National Security Advisor explained some new concerns by the White House about the situation between Russia and Ukraine. Before I get to that, I want to talk to you editorially about where we are in this story and a concern as a journalist that I want to raise. There's always a point in any news story where the press becomes part of the story. The way that we're reporting the story also becomes part of it as well. And stories can take on momentum and life of their own. And I don't know exactly the impact of the press here, but I want to raise this just so you it's something just to take note of, pay attention to. And there's some really key things that we always watch for as journalists. We have to consider the source and we got to consider the words that are used and the timing. And so I really want to consider the source before I get to the content of what the White House talked about today. The content, the announcement, the change from the White House wasn't announced by the president. It wasn't announced by the Secretary of State. It wasn't announced by the Pentagon, the Secretary of Defense. It was the National Security Advisor coming into a press briefing, so an event that's not scheduled particularly for this, and making this announcement and speaking to the press for about 30 minutes. This is a different situation than, let's say, the president stepping in front of the microphone in the Oval Office, making an announcement to the American people. So this was a choice by the White House to have the National Security Advisor deliver this message and in this particular way. What does that all mean? I'm not quite sure. But I want you to pay attention to it because if we do see someone else, a cabinet member like the Secretary of State, or you do see the president speak about this issue, then we will know this is, again, an elevation of this topic. But for now, this message stays with the National Security Advisor. So what is the message? Why was he speaking to the press today? What he was announcing was renewed concerns that Russia is on the brink, essentially, of an invasion of Ukraine. Why is he making this comment now? He said over the last several days, even the last several hours, they're seeing more forces moved by Russia into positions that are concerning. We don't want to forget that Russia's having military drills in Belarus as well as in the south part where the Black Sea is. And I'll show you a map in just a second. So Russia is already having its military moving right now. That's been concerns over the last several days about, well, could these military exercises be sort of a cover for something that could roll into an invasion? And so you have these two events happening at the same time. The White House with this announcement and then Russia also holding these drills. What else did the White House say? The White House said specifically, if you are an American in Ukraine, you have to leave. Can't leave right now? Leave over the next 24 to 48 hours. They want you out. And very interestingly enough, they didn't have a number, by the way, of how many Americans are actually in Ukraine. But they said that the risk is high enough and the prospect of evacuation by U.S. military is essentially zero. So if you're in Ukraine, they want you out now. And they think that the potential for an invasion, where maybe it was, Russia will wait a little bit till the Olympics are over. Russia doesn't want to embarrass its friend China because they have this kind of renewed relationship. Maybe that's a strategy. Now that seems to be out the window. And this idea that this could happen sooner rather than later is there. Here's something else that's new. One of the things we've talked a lot about is that Russia already has a part of Ukraine, Crimea. Let me go ahead and pull up a map so you can see it, so you can have an idea of what I'm talking about here. So Crimea you see in the south, and you also see a part of the map, and it might be difficult for you to see, that says the separatist controlled area. This is a part of Russia. When you're talking about the invasion in 2014, this is the territory that Russia was focused on. And so in the last several weeks, when we're looking at the buildup of Russian troops along the border of Ukraine and also into Belarus, there's been this question, well, if we saw an invasion, maybe it would be a small invasion, right? It's just going to go into the border areas. It's not necessarily going to be all the full Ukraine. Could it be all Ukraine? That's what the White House is saying today. Here's what the White House said, that the invasion could come in a range of forms, including a rapid assault on the city of Kyiv. By the way, Kiev, depends on where you are in the world, but that's the capital of Ukraine. You can see if you look at Belarus, it's right there. Kyiv is right above the word Ukraine. So in a different area than previously, we've seen Russia more aggressively move in the last several years. Also along this border, remember, there's a lot of focus on weather and temperature. We've talked about that as well. Right now, because of the time of year we're in, we know that this ground is harder, more frozen than in the spring, where you might actually see some of these areas be marshlands. And so if you are looking to take advantage of the conditions, now in this particular window would be the time to do it. Also, we saw the previous Russian activity that happened in 2014. I keep coming back to that because it's the last time we've seen that, was around the same time of year. So you have all these kind of confluence of events. But the big takeaways from the White House, this seemed a potential invasion. They keep on going back to, they don't know if Vladimir Putin has made up his mind yet. We don't know the exact time and place, all of those asterisks. But what they are clearly alerting the entire world to is that this could happen sooner than we thought. There seems to be intelligence. They won't say it specifically about why they're raising this alarm right now. They want everybody out of the country that's an American, including removing the diplomatic footprint of the United States. We have an embassy in Kyiv, right? A couple weeks ago, we were evacuating. They did not use that term, but you got to call a spade, telling family members of certain employees of the embassy that they had to leave and giving the option for other workers to do so. So we're reducing our diplomatic footprint. We're telling all Americans they need to leave within 48 hours. We're saying that if you stay in Ukraine and there's an invasion, we are not coming to get you. And this is a real concern that we're not just talking about a little invasion. We're talking about going directly to an aerial assault of the capital. That's a different picture. It's a different picture than some of us had in mind. Again, based on history of tanks moving in to Ukraine. They're talking about an aerial assault. So these are important. I mean, those are really important headlines to know. But I want to keep going back to the strategy behind the White House. A journalist in this briefing, I started clapping. She raised her hand. She said, "Do you know what do you think is the impact of this sort of messaging for the rest of the world? Because the rest of the world is paying attention to what America is doing. Why is that? We're a member of NATO. We are one of the huge militaries that supports NATO. We are sending our military to places like Poland and some of the Baltics that are part of NATO as well, Romania. So we're moving our forces into the area, even though that we're saying that we're not going to engage in any sort of conflict in Ukraine." And so the question that this journalist was raising is, what do you think this sort of messaging does? Do you think this, strategically, do you think this is problematic? The White House, Jake Sullivan, said that he believed they were being the most transparent with the world about what the position is of the United States and NATO, and we're inviting Russia to further engage in diplomacy, if diplomacy is there. So really want you just to know that this happened. And again, we're watching for any further elevation of this message. The question of how this message is received elsewhere is really important. Let me go back to a map again. I want to just show you one more thing, because remember, this isn't going to be really visible for you. Let me find another one that we can use. Remember that on this map, you see Romania and Poland to the south and to the west of Ukraine. You see Belarus. Belarus is a strong ally of Russia, but Poland and Romania are members of NATO. And so if there was an attack on one of them because of the Articles of NATO, the largest military alliance in peacetime that was ever created, if they got into conflict, we would be in a conflict. This is where we're sending some of our troops. If you look to the north of Belarus, you would see Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia. What is Russia's perspective? Russia's perspective is that NATO over the years has increased forces in these areas, and it's been intimidating to Russia, and they don't like it. We're coming too close to them. It's too much of a strategic position against Russia, and they don't like it. That's one of the reasons why they don't want us going into Ukraine. They don't want Ukraine joining NATO. So their point of view is, hey, we're not the aggressors. You're the aggressors. Now, we could sit in a 3-hour panel conversation with experts from Harvard and Yale, and everyone can debate who is the actual aggressor. So there's going to be a different point of view on that. But this is Russia's perspective, which is, hey, wait a minute, like we are the ones that are in our own territory. And in fact, let me show you a tweet coming from the foreign minister of Russia. Twitter is a great asset for this because you can see what people are saying. So the foreign minister of Russia, Sergei Lavrov, and he said, we explained in the tiniest detail today that Russia's armed forces are on their own territory, as distinct from the hundreds and thousands of British military troops deployed in the Baltic. So there was a meeting with the UK foreign minister in Russia. There's been a flood of different important leaders to Russia with meetings, whether with Vladimir Putin or Sergei Lavrov. And this is their argument. Hey, you guys are the ones that are in your, in somebody else's country, coming a little too close to us. Maybe you need to back up. That is Russia's argument. So we'll see how Russia takes this latest announcement from the United States, and we'll see if there's any additional moves being made. But that's where it stands today. If you have any questions, let me know. I know there's a lot to take in. And this thought of a broader armed conflict anywhere in the world at this point, sort of unexpectedly, especially in Eastern Europe, is also a lot to take in. So if you have any questions and you're on the live now, I'm going to jump to some of your questions in a second. I just want to flag for you one thing related to the pandemic. So we know that Pfizer was applying for emergency use authorization for their COVID-19 vaccine for kids. Littles, I call them, 6 months to just under 5 years old, because they already have emergency use authorization for those 5 and older. There was an issue with the data and the research that the Pfizer CEO came out with mid-December and said, listen, this small dose that we're giving these little kids seems effective in basically the 6-month to 2-year-old range. But from 2 to 4-year-old, we're not seeing the same sort of immunity reaction that we would see or we would expect to see. So we actually want to try a 3rd dose of this very small dose to see if that would provide protection. He says this, and then a couple weeks later, the FDA moves forward with wanting to ask Pfizer to file for emergency use authorization, saying that the infections in children is higher, they're being hospitalized, and they want to, in tandem with the research, evaluate it. And so that was the movement. Well, today, Pfizer and the FDA said, we're going to delay this. They were going to look at this data, this ongoing data, on February 15th, so right after Valentine's Day next week. So they're not going to do that. Looks like they're delaying it to April because Pfizer's saying they want to look at this research with the 3rd dose. So they're not saying specifically anything's wrong with those that receive the 2 dose, like a big safety issue. That's not what's coming out. The question is right now about efficacy. And so that's going to be put on pause. Also, real quick announcement, because I know some of you have been really interested in monoclonal antibody treatments, and some of the monoclonal antibody treatments have been prevented from being given to people that had Omicron. The FDA pulled back some of the emergency use authorization. Well, they just provided emergency use authorization for a new monoclonal antibody that they think is effective against Omicron. So there's another one that's in the stream, if you will. So just a couple announcements on the pandemic. So let's just get to a couple of your questions real quick. And some of you are asking about Holly. Holly McKay has been reporting live from Ukraine. I've been in touch with her. She's been doing so much work. And I'm hoping that we'll hear from her in the next several days. Her travel is TBD. If she was on, I would have her jump on with us right now. So let me see if there's anything that else we can jump on and just kind of answer some of this question. Will this lead to a huge war? This is fundamentally the question that everyone's asking. You're seeing World War III trend on social media. That's not something that we can laugh about, right? We have to be real serious about this. This is not something that we could play with. The calculation is this. If Russia goes into Ukraine, what will the United States do? United States and NATO. Ukraine is not a member of NATO. So an attack in Ukraine does not necessarily ignite a response from the United States. We say, and others say, that we will levy sanctions, and these sanctions will be tough against Vladimir Putin. It's going to further marginalize him, and he's going to be weakened by this on the world stage. The question is whether or not Vladimir Putin really cares about that. We don't really know what sort of leverage we really have with some of those sanctions, how much it matters to him. So right now, if you saw headlines that Russia is launching into Ukraine, you would say, okay, now we have to watch what's next, because it doesn't necessarily automatically elicit a response from any NATO members, Germany, Poland, Romania, any of them. But if you get close to the borders of Romania, close to the borders of Poland, then we could be in a different situation. And that's what we would have to watch for. Let me see if I can grab any more questions before I leave you for, this is usually on Friday. I try to leave you guys alone, because I think at this point of the week, like you're ready for the weekend, you're ready for our newsletter. By the way, if you haven't signed up for that, you totally should. Just go to smarternews.com, sign up. It's great. We put a great newsletter together on the weekend. So if you're sitting and you're just kind of like, trying to waste a little time, you have something that's substantive and fun to read. And I really love our newsletter. So if you haven't done so, definitely sign up. Why are they wanting to invade? That, I believe that question is for Russia. So why would Russia be interested in invading Ukraine? Ukraine is a former part of the Soviet Union, so is Belarus. One of the things that Vladimir Putin has talked about is reuniting the Soviet Union, bringing back the stature of Russia on the world stage. And Ukraine, because of its seemingly warmer relationships with the West, pose a risk to Vladimir Putin. Because let's say Ukraine gets itself together, and by the way, that's been one of the issues with Ukraine. Super corrupt. Why isn't Ukraine a member of NATO? Why don't we give Ukraine more? Corruption in the government, been a huge issue. So it's like they're kind of stuck in between. And so Russia's like, if they continue to make progress towards the West, then the West is going to be right next to me, and I'm losing this territory that once was a part of our great nation. And that's one of the reasons that there would be motivation to go in. Why now, though, is a question for that's a really great question. There's risk for Russia. You can't invade somewhere and not expect casualties. You can't, and everybody is at risk if you're in leadership of criticism from their own people. One of the questions with Russia is, would the people ever gather enough strength to overthrow someone like Putin and invite a more friendly Western leader in? And we've seen protests in Russia, but they're put down very aggressively because you're not allowed to do that. So this is a political calculation as well for Vladimir Putin. How much does he want to do this? What is the risk to him? What does he see the benefit as? Is it necessary now? These are really important questions. And Jamie, you just said the pot is boiling for a long time. It has been. And this is very key to remember. Go back to Holly's report from earlier this week. Since 2014, since this previous invasion by Russia, there has been a continuous fighting between the two sides, the Ukrainian military and Russian-backed forces in the area. Not maybe every day, but enough that you would say that it's been in a state of conflict or war. So this is where we're at right now. So let me just go ahead and see if I can grab one more. And then, by the way, I'll continue to watch and see what questions that could come up. And as we're, this is a quickly changing situation. So let's see what happens. After an announcement like this, does diplomacy have renewed urgency? Who knows? There's a lot of different options on the table. I was thinking about this though, real quick before I let you go, because we're seeing a lot, again online. There's obviously so much bubbling up emotion. You're seeing a lot about these trucker convoys, right? Protests in Canada is affecting the United States. You're seeing potential protests here at home. There's protests in Europe, and there's a lot online. And one of the things that we have to be aware of is that not everybody online is who they say they are. We already know that. But specifically when it comes to Russia and how effective they are as hackers, but also how they do put together campaigns. To rile up, to put a certain perspective forward. I just would be really sensitive to that over the next couple days. I would be really sensitive to comments that are coming out of nowhere. I'd really listen closely to what people are saying on the record, and just kind of a word to the wise on that. Okay. All right. I'm gonna let you go. I promise if we see any more updates, I'll let you know. We're going into a big weekend. Not only are the Olympics going on, you have the Super Bowl in America. You have a lot of really big events that get the public's attention. There's always a heightened risk when there's a lot of attention focused in one place, one area, for the unexpected to happen. I'll always remember speaking to the Department of Homeland Security Secretary before Super Bowl one weekend, because there was concerns. We were closer to 9/11 at that time, and there was always concerns about that. And I think we're in this news cycle period that we have to be sensitive to that. There's a lot of eyes and energy going into one particular area. That's motivation for some bad actors as well as good actors to try to get on the stage. And it's just one of those times that, again, we want to be sensitive. We're going to take these headlines as they come. We're going to digest them. We're going to talk about why they matter, and just try to, as much as you can, clear out the clutter of some of these static voices that you don't really know where they're coming from. I hope that's helpful. All right, guys, I'll make sure to download this and put it on YouTube if that's easier for you to watch. And if you haven't signed up for our newsletter, definitely do so. But thanks for being here. Thanks for making Smarter News a reality. Quick, concise, nonpartisan news. Sometimes we're not so quick, but sometimes these stories need a little bit more. All right, guys, have a great day, and I'll talk to you soon.